That night in Seattle, the rain wouldn't stop. The neon sign of a small diner by the harbor flickered blue and red over the puddles spreading across the street. Inside, the warmth from the kitchen and the smell of roasted coffee drifted through the air, pushing back the chill outside. At a corner table, Emma Carter sat upright, her hands clasped tightly together. It was her first date in 2 years. She had spent hours getting ready. A deep blue dress, her hair neatly pinned, the small hearing aid behind her ear carefully adjusted. She hoped, just a little, that tonight might be different. The bell over the door chimed. Mark, the man she had met through an app, stepped in. His shirt was damp from the rain, his steps hurried, no smile, no apology for being late. He sat down, his gaze flicking toward Emma's ear and pausing there. Then came the words. Sharp and cruel as a blade. God, you're actually deaf. If I'd known that, I wouldn't have wasted my evening. The sound cut through the room. Forks and knives froze mid-air. Conversations fell silent. Emma felt the glass in her hand tremble, a few drops spilling onto the table. She drew a deep breath, forcing her voice not to shake. I have a hearing impairment, she said slowly, clearly, her fingers moving in sign alongside her words. But that doesn't make me any less worthy than anyone else. Mark let out a short, mocking laugh, folding his arms, eyes gleaming with disdain. Sorry, I have standards. I don't date people who are disabled. The word splashed into the silence like ink spreading in water. Blood rushed to Emma's face. She could hear the pounding of her heartbeat, and all around her, the weight of stares, pitying, curious, judgmental, pressing in like fog. The air felt too thick to breathe. At a nearby window table, a 7-year-old boy set his spoon down. Ethan Brooks stared at the scene, wide-eyed. He tugged on his father's sleeve, his small hands signing rapidly. Why is that man being mean to her? Daniel Brooks placed his warm hand over his son's, a gentle touch meant to calm him. He didn't answer right away. His eyes had hardened, fixed on the corner table where the young woman sat. Inside his chest rose that familiar feeling from emergencies. No fire, no smoke. But someone was about to drown. Mark sighed, pushing his chair back. I don't have time for this. Enjoy your night. He turned away, leaving behind the cold scent of his cologne as he walked out the door. The bell chimed again, hollow and final. Emma remained there, motionless. Her hand rested on the table, knuckles pale. She watched the water spreading from the spilled glass and wished she could disappear into it. Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve again, this time harder. His hands moved quickly, almost pleading. She's sinking. Daniel looked at his son, then back at Emma. The decision came quietly, but firmly. He placed a few bills on the table, nodded at Ethan, their silent cue for come with me, and stood. He didn't go after the man who had walked out. Instead, he crossed the diner toward the corner where someone had just been crushed by a single word. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and steady. And in that space between the rain and the trembling neon light, Daniel stepped forward, carrying with him a pair of hands that knew how to speak. The bell above the door fell silent as Mark vanished into the rain, leaving behind only a cold emptiness and a single word hanging in the air. Disabled. Emma sat frozen, her fingers crushing a napkin until it was wrinkled beyond recognition. What she hated most wasn't the insult itself, but the pitying looks from the surrounding tables, as if everyone were staring at a crack that could never be mended. A figure stopped in front of her table. Emma looked up, her tired eyes braced to reject any further sympathy. But the man didn't speak. He simply looked at her, then his large hands began to move slowly. You deserve someone better. Emma went still. Her heart lurched. For the first time, a stranger wasn't using empty words or pretending to comfort her. He was speaking in the language she lived with. "You," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You know, ASL?" The man nodded, his eyes warm. "Enough to say what matters," he said, signing alongside his words. A small figure appeared beside him. A boy with bright eyes and messy hair stood close to his father, his small hands shyly forming signs. "You're pretty. Don't be sad." Emma let out a soft laugh, her smile still shaky but enough to crack the ice inside her. She bent down a little, signing back. "Thank you. You're very sweet." The boy blushed and pressed himself closer to his father. The man placed a hand on his son's shoulder, nodding slightly, pride glinting in his eyes. Emma straightened, clutching the napkin tighter, her voice low. "You don't have to do this." The man shook his head. "Some things you have to do, especially when your son is watching." The words made Emma's chest tighten. She had never heard anyone say something like that, simple but solid, as if it needed no further explanation. The space between them softened. She noticed his hand resting on the back of the chair across from her, pausing as if waiting. "May I?" He signed along with his words. "Sit with you for a while." Emma hesitated. Part of her urged her to get up and leave, to seal off this humiliating night, but the boy's eyes were still on her, clear and hopeful. Emma gave a small nod. The man sat down. "I'm Daniel," he said. "This is my son, Ethan." "Emma," she replied, her hands slowly signing the name. The hum of conversation around the diner began to return, forks clinking again. But at the corner table, time seemed to slow. Emma still didn't know who this man and his boy were meant to be in her life. All she knew was that at the moment she thought she was sinking, they had reached out and pulled her up. The rain still lashed against the diner's windows, but inside, the small corner table had become its own quiet world, sealed off from the rest. Emma turned a crumpled napkin between her fingers, lost in thought. She had never let a stranger sit across from her this long after such a disastrous date. But Daniel wasn't like anyone else. He didn't try to patch her wounds with hollow comfort. He simply sat upright, calm, his hands ready to move whenever words weren't enough. Ethan rested his chin on his hand, staring at Emma with open curiosity. "He's curious," Daniel explained, speaking and signing at the same time, his eyes carrying a hint of apology. "Since losing his hearing, Ethan's always wanted to meet adults like him. It doesn't happen often." Emma nodded gently, her fingers automatically signing. "It's okay. I feel the same way." A small, awkward smile crossed her lips, but it was warm. The air around them softened. At last, Emma exhaled, setting her hand on the wooden table, tilting her head slightly so both father and son could see her lips. "I lost my hearing when I was 12, she said slowly, her mouth forming each word clearly while her hands signed along. "It was meningitis. I used to hear, talk normally. Then one morning I woke up and everything went silent, like someone had flipped a switch." Ethan blinked, not taking his eyes off her for a second. Daniel's brows furrowed faintly. "Back then," Emma continued, her voice quivering, "I thought I'd never talk to anyone again. But the doctor convinced my family to get hearing aids. I practiced and managed to keep part of my voice." She shrugged and gave a small, self-conscious smile. "It sounds a little different, slower, sometimes offbeat." Daniel nodded, saying nothing. He knew that sometimes silence was the truest form of listening. Emma drew a deeper breath. "I learned sign language in the years after. At first it was just defense, a way out when speech failed me. But then, I realized it's what gave me belonging. This language kept me standing." Ethan sat upright, his small hands clumsy but sincere as he signed, "You're strong." The heat rose behind Emma's eyes. She blinked hard, nodding her thanks. Then it was Daniel's turn. He turned his coffee cup slowly, the movement steady, reflective. "Ethan was 3 when he got a high fever," he said quietly. "We thought it was just something mild, but afterward, he lost nearly half his hearing." His gaze drifted briefly toward his son, then back to Emma. "I didn't know anything about ASL. I didn't know anyone who was deaf. The only thing I knew was I couldn't let my boy grow up in complete silence." Emma looked at his hands, rough, calloused hands that once held fire hoses, now learning fragile gestures for the sake of his child. "I started with online videos and books," Daniel went on, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "My hands were stiff, my signs all wrong, and Ethan kept laughing at me. But little by little, we found our rhythm, and now—" He lifted his hands and signed fluently, "My son is my whole world." Ethan grinned wide, signing back, clumsy but clear. "You're my world too, Dad." Emma laughed, this time without restraint. The ache, the shame, the weight of the evening melted away, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, the sense of being understood. "You did all this alone?" she asked softly, her hands moving in tandem. Daniel nodded. "My wife passed away from cancer, right before Ethan's diagnosis. I thought I'd lost everything. But then I looked at him and realized I had to learn how to live again." A quiet moment followed. The rain outside tapped a slow rhythm on the glass. Emma drummed her fingers lightly on the table before looking up at him again. "You don't know what this means to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Meeting you two tonight. It feels like seeing light through a window after being in the dark for so long. I'm not used to being protected. I've spent years building walls, words, signs, silence." Daniel didn't answer right away. He simply raised his hand, signing slowly, each motion deliberate and steady. Some walls aren't meant to stay forever. Emma froze. Those signs, coming from hands that had once fought flames in chaos, carried a weight words never could. Ethan tilted his head, not fully grasping the meaning, but his innocent smile broke the heaviness in the air. And in that small diner, as rain whispered against the glass, Emma realized that maybe tonight wasn't a failure after all. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. Outside the window, the rain still poured relentlessly, but at the small corner table, the world seemed quieter than the rest of the diner. Emma twisted the napkin in her hands, trying to hide the lingering tremor of emotion. Ethan rested his chin on his palms, his bright eyes fixed on her as though he were watching a story unfold. Daniel slowly placed his hand on the table. There was something he had meant to say since the moment he sat down, but only now did he find the courage. "This weekend," he began, speaking and signing at once. "Ethan's school is having a science fair. Every kid prepares a project. He picked dinosaurs." He glanced toward his son, a proud smile touching his lips. "He's been drawing, building a model, and he's going to present it in sign language." Immediately, Ethan sat up straighter, his small hands signing eagerly. "I made a brachiosaurus. It's huge. I want you to see it." Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes, but another part held back. "I'm just a stranger," she thought. "Showing up at a family event. Wouldn't that be overstepping?" Memories of rejection and exclusion flickered through her mind like old film reels. "Thank you," she said softly, her fingers tracing the signs. "But I'm not sure I should—" Before she could finish, Ethan reached out and held her hand. His tiny palm was warm and certain, his fingers forming each sign slowly but firmly. "Please, I want you to come." Emma froze. That small hand cut through years of walls she'd built around herself. She looked at him, at those innocent eyes that held no pity, no agenda, just genuine hope, and her lips trembled. Daniel stayed silent, letting his son speak for both of them. He knew that sometimes a child's invitation could mean more than any adult's reassurance. Finally, Emma exhaled and smiled faintly. "All right," she signed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll come." Ethan jumped up in his seat, his face lighting up like sunrise. His hands fluttered in excitement. "I'll show you everything. The dinosaurs, the volcano, my whole presentation." Daniel laughed, gently steadying his son's shoulders. But when his eyes met Emma's again, neither of them spoke. For a long moment, there was only the quiet rhythm of rain between them. Something unspoken had shifted. Emma glanced down at her empty glass, her fingers tapping lightly on the rim. For the first time in years, she had plans for the weekend. Not with a man who made her feel small, but with a boy who had taken her hand and a father who knew how to listen. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside Emma's heart, something quietly began to move. It was one of those rare dry days in Seattle after endless rain. Thin sunlight slipped through the gray clouds, spilling over the elementary school courtyard like a fragile promise. Emma stood by the gate, her hand gripping the strap of her bag, nerves coiling in her chest. She had thought about canceling more than once. But the memory of that small hand clutching hers, the pleading eyes signing please, it wouldn't let her turn away. Inside the gymnasium, long tables stretched in neat rows, children crowded around their projects. Papier-mâché volcanoes, hanging solar systems, homemade battery cars. Parents gathered nearby, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Emma walked slowly between the displays, feeling strangely out of place, until she heard her name. "Emma!" Daniel waved from the far corner, Ethan beside him, his face glowing like a lantern. The boy waved both hands, nearly bouncing in excitement. Emma smiled and hurried toward them. On the table before her stood a giant papier-mâché dinosaur, painted bright green, its long neck proudly arched despite its clumsy shape. Ethan placed his hand on the model, then turned to her, signing eagerly. "Brachiosaurus, long neck, I made it in 3 days." Emma raised her brows, signing back with a grin. "It's beautiful. I've never seen one this big." Ethan flushed, then quickly flipped through a folder beside him. Inside were pages of dinosaur drawings, scribbled but surprisingly detailed. Daniel stood quietly, eyes glowing with quiet pride. When presentation time came, each group went up one by one. When Ethan's turn arrived, he walked onto the small stage, clutching his drawings, his little shoulders trembling. Daniel bent down and whispered, "You've got this, buddy. Just sign like you do at home." From the audience, Emma lifted her hands and signed clearly, "I believe in you." Ethan looked at her, and something in his eyes steadied. He took a deep breath and began. His hands moved through the air, strong and certain, graceful in their rhythm. His voice came softly, uneven, but his signs spoke louder than sound. Parents leaned forward, a few whispered to one another. Some children tried mimicking his movements. And when Ethan finished with one proud, sweeping gesture, the room erupted in applause. Then, almost as if guided by instinct, a second wave followed. Silent applause. Dozens of hands raised and waving in the language of the deaf community. Emma's throat tightened. Her eyes stung, but not from shame or sorrow this time, only from joy, pure and fierce. After the performance, Ethan ran toward her, not to his father, but to her. He threw his arms around her waist, his small hands signing rapidly against her side. "You saw it?" "I did it." Emma laughed, holding him close. "I saw. she whispered, signing with one hand. You were amazing. Daniel stood a few feet away, arms folded, watching them both. In that moment, he realized what he was seeing wasn't just his son's triumph. It was a woman who once sat alone in silence, now smiling openly, and a boy who had chosen her as his anchor. As they left the gym, Ethan tugged on Daniel's sleeve, insisting on getting ice cream. Daniel glanced at Emma, the question clear in his eyes. She laughed and nodded. That afternoon, the three of them sat by the window of a small ice cream shop. Ethan's chocolate scoop melted over the edge of his cup, while Emma wiped the mess with a napkin. The boy giggled, sunlight dancing in his hair. Daniel watched them quietly, a thought forming like a whisper in his mind. Maybe a family could begin from moments as simple as this. After the science fair, everything seemed to fall into a quiet rhythm of its own. No one made plans or promises, yet the following Saturday morning, when Emma walked into the little pancake shop on the corner of Cherry Street, Daniel and Ethan were already there, waiting at the table by the window. Ethan waved high, nearly standing on his chair, his hands flying with excitement. You came! I saved your seat! Emma laughed, walking toward them. Daniel pulled out the chair beside him, his nod simple yet familiar. The awkwardness of that first night was long gone. From then on, Saturday mornings became their thing. Emma ordered blueberry pancakes, Daniel drank his black coffee, and Ethan did his best to finish a giant chocolate pancake, though he never made it past halfway. Amid the hum of other customers and the clinking of dishes, the three of them shared their own little corner, where words and signs mingled, where glances spoke louder than sound. On another afternoon, Daniel took Ethan to the harbor to fly a kite. Emma happened to come along, or perhaps by then, she had stopped finding excuses not to. The sea breeze tugged at the string, the kite soared high, and Ethan ran across the pier laughing, his hands signing wildly in the air. It's flying so high. Emma ran after him, her dress catching the wind, her eyes bright with joy. Daniel stood behind them, watching, as if that moment had always belonged in his life. Then there were the bookstore afternoons. Ethan curled up in the children's section, flipping through pages of dinosaur picture books, while Emma sat beside him, patiently signing the names of each species. Daniel lingered by the counter, pretending to read the newspaper, but stealing glances at the two of them every few seconds. At first, these moments felt like coincidences, but slowly, they became habits. One evening, as Daniel was washing the dishes, Ethan rushed into the kitchen, waving his hands excitedly. Emma read to me today. I want her to come again tomorrow night. Daniel chuckled, drying his hands. Don't you think she might be busy? Ethan frowned, his small hands forming the signs with certainty. She's not busy for me. Daniel froze. The innocent words hit deeper than he expected. He realized that somewhere along the way, Emma had become part of their rhythm. There had been no announcement, no line crossed, no declarations, just quiet presence, repeated until it became essential. For Emma, the change was just as real. She no longer spent her evenings alone, listening to the rain tapping against her window like an unanswered question. Now, when she thought of the weekend, she pictured Ethan's gap-toothed smile and Daniel's steady, gentle nod. That anticipation was quiet but steady, like a thread she could hold on to. One evening, the three of them sat by the shore watching the sunset. Ethan, exhausted after a long day, leaned his head against Emma's shoulder and drifted to sleep. Daniel cleared his throat softly, eyes darting away. Emma said nothing, just pulled her jacket around the boy, tucking it close. Neither spoke, but both understood. Something had moved beyond coincidence. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm, and somewhere within, a new habit had quietly taken root. It was an early autumn evening, the breeze from the bay carrying a gentle chill. The three of them sat on the porch outside Daniel's house after dinner. Ethan had just run off to his room, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, curling under the blanket and leaving behind a stillness that belonged only to the grown-ups. The warm kitchen light spilled through the open door, glowing over 2 steaming cups of tea. Emma turned hers slowly in her hands, her finger tapping softly against the porcelain, hesitant. Daniel noticed, but didn't press. At last, she looked up, her voice lower now, her hands moving in quiet rhythm with her words. My ex-boyfriend left right after I told him about my hearing loss. He said loving me would be complicated, that he wanted a normal life, not one filled with challenges. Emma tried to smile, but her lips trembled. After that, I convinced myself not to expect too much. I built walls, my life became work, home, teaching, nothing else. I didn't open any more doors. Daniel stayed silent, his eyes following her gestures, the tightness in his own chest mirroring hers. He set his cup down, rubbing his calloused palms together before speaking softly. My wife. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the darkness beyond the porch. She died of cancer, just a few months before Ethan was diagnosed with partial hearing loss. One morning I took him for his checkup. That afternoon, I got the call from her hospital. He inhaled deeply, but his voice still trembled. For a while I thought the world had taken everything from me in a single day. I told myself I wouldn't let anyone else in again. It would just be me and my boy, and that would have to be enough. The wind rustled the trees, scattering leaves across the porch. Emma tightened her grip on her cup, her eyes glistening. How did you manage? She asked softly. Daniel lifted his hands, signing deliberately. I learned to live again, for Ethan. They sat in silence. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock and the sound of their breathing filled the air. In that pause, they both realized they were sitting with someone who truly understood what it meant to lose, to be left behind, and yet still be here. Emma set her cup down, her eyes meeting his. You know, she said quietly, listening to you, I think maybe my walls don't need to be so high anymore. Daniel smiled faintly, something warm flickering behind his steady gaze. Some walls, he said, are built so the right person can come along and tear them down. Emma bit her lip, her heart beating faster. She didn't respond, only nodded, letting the words settle inside her like a small stone dropped into still water. From the bedroom, a soft giggle drifted out. Ethan's sleepy laughter, sweet and light. Both of them turned toward the sound and smiled. That small, shared laugh didn't erase the pain of their pasts, but it dulled its edges. Later that night, as Emma left, Daniel stood at the door, watching her figure fade beneath the dim streetlight. For the first time in years, he realized, neither of them was truly alone anymore. That afternoon, Daniel called Emma just as he was leaving work. I have to stop by the site before picking up Ethan. Are you free to come along? His voice carried a hint of hesitation, but Emma could hear something else beneath it. A quiet hope. She said yes, her heartbeat quickening for reasons she didn't name. The elementary schoolyard was alive with noise. Shouts echoed, basketballs bounced against pavement, children scattered like flocks of sparrows set free. Emma walked beside Daniel, trying to keep her smile steady, but as they drew closer, she saw Ethan standing by the fence, clutching his sketchbook of dinosaurs tight to his chest. 3 boys were pointing and laughing. One mimicked clumsy signs with exaggerated gestures, sneering, "Hey, he's deaf. Sounds so weird when he talks. Who can even understand him?" Ethan lowered his head, his notebook slipping from his arms, his pencil rolling across the ground. Before Daniel could move, Emma was already there. She knelt, picked up the notebook, brushed off the dust, and placed it gently back in Ethan's hands. "It's okay," she said softly, her fingers signing each word clearly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." Then she turned to the group of boys, her tone calm but firm, her gaze steady. "Do you know something? Ethan isn't someone who can't talk. He speaks a language many grown-ups don't even know. Sign language. Just like how someone speaks Spanish or Japanese, we don't laugh at them, do we?" The boys exchanged uneasy looks. One of them muttered, "No, ma'am." Emma nodded, a faint smile curving her lips. "Exactly. Sign language is just as beautiful and useful as any other language. Want to learn a word?" There was a pause, then a few small hands went up. "Yes, ma'am?" Emma raised her hand, demonstrating a simple, fluid motion. "This means hello." The children imitated her, their laughter ringing through the yard, no longer mocking, but delighted. Ethan lifted his head, watching his classmates sign the word back to him. The timid look on his face melted away, replaced by something bright and open. The dismissal bell rang. The children scattered, still waving their hands in the air, signing hello as they went. Ethan turned to Emma, eyes shining, his hands moving fast. "See? I'm not weird." Emma placed a hand on his shoulder, replying with a smile. "You're not weird. You're special. And you have a language that's wonderful." Daniel, who had stood back the whole time, found himself unable to speak. He simply watched, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. When Ethan ran to him, bursting with excitement, signing wildly, "Dad! My friends learned to sign. They're not laughing anymore. Miss Emma taught them." Daniel crouched and pulled his son into a hug. Then he looked up at Emma, his voice low but steady. "You just did something I couldn't. You made him see he's not alone." Emma shook her head gently. "I only did what was right. He deserves to be seen for who he really is." Daniel said nothing more, but the look he gave her said everything. In that moment, he understood. This woman wasn't just a visitor in their lives. She had chosen to stand with his son, to protect him as if it were her own duty. When the three of them left the schoolyard, Ethan held Emma's hand tight, tugging her forward. Daniel followed behind, a quiet smile on his face. He knew then, sometimes it's the smallest moments that change everything. One weekend evening, Seattle returned to its familiar drizzle. Daniel invited Emma to join him and Ethan at the harbor. The boy brought along his new kite, a gift from Emma after learning about his fascination with dinosaurs and the sky. The wind from the bay was strong enough to send the pterodactyl-shaped kite soaring high. Ethan ran along the wooden boardwalk, laughter echoing through the mist, his hands signing wildly, "Fly high! Fly high!" Emma stood by the railing, her hair tousled by the salty wind. Daniel stepped beside her, and together they watched the boy race beneath the glowing harbor lights. The water shimmered with golden reflections, the surface rippling like glass under the night. "He hasn't laughed this much in years," Daniel said softly. He signed the words too, making sure Emma caught them. "Not since his mother passed away." Emma tilted her head slightly, saying nothing for a moment. In her eyes, she saw not just a man speaking about loss, but one who had quietly carried his pain while learning to smile again. And that sight touched something deep within her. "You've done well," she replied, her fingers moving slowly. "Ethan is an incredible boy." Daniel looked at her. The wind brushed back Emma's hair, revealing the small hearing aid behind her ear. For an instant, he saw his own reflection in her gaze, a recognition that went beyond words. He drew in a steady breath, his voice lower now. "I used to think I'd never really laugh again. But then—" He paused, lifting his hands to sign carefully, each word deliberate. Meeting you reminded me how it feels. Emma froze, her heart skipping as though the wind itself had pushed it off rhythm. She didn't know what to say. Her lips parted, then closed again as her gaze drifted toward the dark water shimmering beneath the pier lights. From across the dock, Ethan shouted, holding up his kite. "Look, it's flying like a real dinosaur!" Emma laughed, the tension in her chest easing into warmth. She signed back with a grin. "Well done." Daniel kept his eyes on her. The golden light from the lamppost fell across half his face, outlining the quiet strength and hesitation there. He said nothing more, but the way his eyes lingered on her, steady, unguarded, was enough to make her pulse quicken. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the waves and the flutter of the kite above them. Emma gripped the railing, grounding herself against the pull inside her. She knew a door had opened with his words, and when their eyes met again, she could feel that something between them had shifted. Ethan came running back, breathless and beaming, the kite trailing behind him like a bright wing in the wind. He grabbed Emma's hand, tugging. "Run with me," he signed, laughing. Emma laughed too and ran after him, her footsteps splashing lightly against the wet boards. Daniel followed behind, watching their silhouettes merge into the soft, amber light of the harbor. And in that moment, he knew. This was no longer coincidence. It was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name, but already knew he didn't want to lose. That night, rain drifted softly over Seattle. Daniel's car pulled up in front of Emma's small apartment. Ethan was fast asleep in the back seat, clutching his dinosaur kite as if it were treasure. Emma turned, gently tucking his jacket around him. The child's face was peaceful, his breathing steady. The sight made her heart soften. "Even in his dreams, he won't let go," she murmured with a faint smile. Daniel stood nearby, watching the two of them quietly. And in that moment, he saw something he thought he'd lost forever. The image of a home. A gentle woman, a sleeping child, and a calm that filled the night air. When Emma stepped out of the car, Daniel followed. They stood together under the narrow awning, the rain falling in delicate threads. Emma reached for her keys but hesitated. Daniel didn't speak. Instead, he slipped off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She looked up, startled by the warmth, not just of the coat, but of his gaze. There were no words, only the quiet weight of everything unsaid. Slowly, Daniel reached for her hand. For a moment she hesitated, then let him hold it. His hand was warm, steady, grounding. And just then, the rain stopped. The gentle patter faded into silence, leaving only the rare stillness of the night. The streetlight's golden glow reflected their joined hands, and through the car window, the faint outline of Ethan sleeping peacefully in the back seat. Emma looked down, then smiled. She knew she had just stepped through a new doorway. Daniel gave a small nod, his eyes softening, his fingers tightening around hers for a heartbeat, before letting go. Emma stepped back toward her door. Before going inside, she turned and gave him one last smile, quiet, promising. Daniel stood there until her silhouette disappeared behind the light, then finally returned to the car where his son still slept, the dinosaur kite resting beside him like a dream that refused to fade. Life doesn't always hand us a perfect story from the start. Sometimes it begins with loss, with silence that feels endless. But then, at the right moment, a door opens, not loudly, not with fanfare, but through a look, a touch, or simply someone who chooses to stay. What matters is not how long we've walked alone, but whether we have the courage to open the door when someone knocks. Because sometimes, happiness arrives in its simplest form. A child asleep in the back seat, Two hands held beneath the sky where the rain has just stopped. And in that quiet, tender moment, you finally know the road ahead no longer has to be walked alone.